If you enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like us to continue putting out regular quality content, head over to patreon.com/aircrewinterview, where you can donate monthly, and in return you will get rewards ranging from early interview viewings, bonus clips, credited as a producer, and much more. Thank you and enjoy. Can you share that great story you told me about on WhatsApp about the bus driver recognising you from your interview? I think our viewers will enjoy that.
Yeah, so I was commuting to work. It was the pattern before this one, and I'd landed in Frankfurt Airport. I was just walking across the road to pick up the shuttle bus to the hotel, and there was a bus just driving past, and the driver sort of said something to me as I was crossing the road, but I didn't really understand what he said, and I was wearing my uniform. Mm-hmm. And he then parked the bus up and came over, and it turned out he had been following me on Aircrew Interview. So he'd seen the interview, and he'd seen the clip of the T4 as well. Mm-hmm. So we had a long chat. So that was quite nice. Yeah, he recognised me. Hi everybody out there. Let's just dive straight in then to the first question here, and it is, I'm sorry, there's no name against this one, but it's how did the training differ from the GR3 to the newer Harriers? Well, obviously, when I went onto the Harrier, I was new to the aircraft, so just learning VSTOL is quite a task and takes up a considerable amount of the training on the OCU. And so conversion to the newer Harrier wasn't so difficult. It wasn't so different. But we didn't have a two-seater, so we did a lot of training on in the simulator before we went solo in the airplane. And apart from that, I would say the GR5, as it was then, was an airplane that was easier to fly than the GR3. So it was actually a lot easier. The cockpit had better functionality, better all-round view. The wing gave a lot more lift than the GR3 wing, so it was still reducing lift down to sort of 50 knots, maybe a little bit lower than that, whereas the GR3 was basically jet-borne from 100 knots in the decel. So it was an easier airplane to fly. Next question from Yin Zhang. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hi, Yin. Can I comment on flying the Harrier DACT against fast movers such as other fast jets? Is VIFing really useful or recommended in BFM tactics? I did some DACT over the years in the Harrier with all kinds of airplanes, F-16s, F-15s, a lot of stuff out in Decimanu at the ACMI range out there, and also in the North Sea. The Harrier GR3 was not really designed for air combat. I know it did air combat in the Falkland Islands, and it gained its name for that, but it wasn't really designed for that. The vector thrust, I think I mentioned it when I was talking on my original interview, aircrew interview, a while back. Fighter pilots need to maintain energy in the fight. It's all important. So that if you start bleeding off energy, it's not good. You need to get out of the fight. And the problem with using vector thrust is it tends to kill energy. So although you get an initial nose authority, in that you can turn into the fight and you can put the nose onto the enemy quite quickly, it costs you a lot of energy. And so I would say that it wasn't that useful. It was quite good as a last-ditch maneuver type of thing, but that's something we did practice using, but I think it had limited use actually. Next question from the Freckle Puny. Harrier or Jag, which is the better attacker, let's say from the Harrier GR5 onwards versus the later Jag updates? I learned to fly the Jaguar when it had just had its 1064 update, which is quite a major avionics update to the airplane, and it made it a very accurate ground attack aircraft. So it was very easy to use, to utilize. The weapon aim system was good, and it was accurate. The GR5 had a slightly different attack avionics system. It had the angle rate bombing system, which was more designed for medium level type attacks. And by the time I got onto the GR5, we were moving a little bit further away from low level and more onto medium level attacks anyway. So I would say the GR5 and then what became the GR7 was a better airplane, and for night attack the GR7 was designed like that from the go. So although the Jaguar did do the night attack stuff, they did a lot of development work on that. It was all stuff that was added on later, and I never got to fly it at night anyway in the night attack role, so I can't really comment on that. What else we got here? Adam Cotton. Hi, Adam. From a pure handling and flight performance perspective, which is the best version of the Harrier, in your opinion? The GR7, which became the GR9, with 100% lurks, the leading edge route extensions, was the pinnacle really of Harrier development. Great airplane. I've talked a little bit about the VSTOL performance. The VSTOL performance was much better in the GR7. So from handling and flight performance perspective, the GR7. SG Kingley asks, have you flown any non-military aircraft? If so, what type? Well, yeah, I left the Air Force in 2000, and I've been flying commercially ever since. And in fact, I've only flown one type of aircraft since then, which is the Boeing 747. And I was lucky enough to start out on the Classic, on the 747-200 aircraft. I flew that for about 3 years, and then then I transferred onto the 400 with the Rolls-Royce engines, and then so I've been flying the 400, and then we got the extended range freighter, which was a slightly longer fuselage 747, and now we've got the last iteration of the type, which is the 747-8, which I'm flying quite a lot at the moment, which I just read is the longest commercial aircraft in the world, so it's got a record for that. And yeah, I've been flying those ever since. Next question, let's have a look, see if I can pick somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Flight Express, what advice would you give to an aspiring pilot, not just the Air Force, but any aviation flying? What did you like about the Harrier more than the Jag? Thanks. I think this is good advice for anyone that's starting out in the adult world and looking for a career, is to not give up, but also to really focus on what it is you want to do, what you think you're going to enjoy, and don't give up on that. I only really ever had one ambition, and it was to be a pilot. I didn't have a plan B, which is probably not a great idea. I should have had a plan B. I'd always advise somebody to do that, but I didn't. I just wanted to fly, and I just was focused on that, and that's what I wanted to do. And just don't give up, and don't be put off. People will tell you, might not be able to do that, or just don't give up. Don't give up and stay focused. And you're also asking about what I like about the Harrier more than the Jag. The Harrier hovers. What else is there? It's a unique airplane. So there you go. Mike Child, hi Mike, and you're asking me, do you think the Harrier would still have a significant role to play today had it not been retired in 2010? Yeah, definitely. Remember, it's still in service with the US Marine Corps and Spanish Navy. It's still a very relevant airplane. When it was retired from the RAF, it was doing a great job in Afghanistan. So definitely still a relevant and potent machine, I think, if it was still in service today. Another question from Adrian. your Reds Tour 95-96, what was your favourite time and venue? The first part of the tour was to South Africa, and that was tremendous. I hadn't been to Africa before. That was an absolutely fabulous opportunity in displaying in front of a crowd at Cape Town, right by Table Mountain, was fantastic. The very next day, though, we flew from Cape Town to East London and then up to Durban, and we flew low level all along the Garden Route. And I still maintain that that's the best flying day I've ever had in my career. However, if we talk about displays, then I think the display over Sydney Harbour in January 1996, that's got to be the one. I mean, that was absolutely tremendous. I don't think it was our best display. I remember it being particularly bumpy that day, but it was the biggest crowd I think the team's ever displayed in front of, and it was Sydney in the summer, so it was fantastic. Let's have somebody else here. So a question here. Hi Mark, were you at RF Larbrook at the time of the GR7 bird strike crash? Any comments? Larbrook was the best years of my life. Yeah, I was there for a year. So when I finished on the Reds at the end of 96, I went back to the OCU, converted back onto the Harrier, and I went out to 4 Squadron at Larbrook, and I was there for 12 months. Don't remember a bird strike crash though, so I couldn't comment on that. Zigzag's asking a question. Nuclear missions, what was the yield? I can't comment on nuclear missions. I never did the strike mission, so I can't comment on that. What was your favourite airspace to fly, the Harrier or Jaguar in the UK? Scotland. That is the best low-flying area in the world. Absolutely amazing. I spent a lot of time flying in Scotland, both in the Jaguar on the OCU, which at that time was at Lossiemouth, and then later when I was at Coltishall, we used to still do a lot of flying up there, and we did a lot of flying the Harrier. And when I was instructing on the OCU, we would take students up to Scotland and do some of the last bits of training on the main course up there. So easy one to answer. And next one. What was your first Harrier like in the dark in terms of landing in concealed highs? Also, what was the most challenging landing you have experienced? I guess you're talking about night flying in the Harrier. The airplane was very much designed for night flying, so the cockpit lighting was designed to work with night vision goggles, and we had the wide angle head-up display with the forward-looking infrared, so it was nice to fly low level at night. Challenging doing vertical landings onto pads, but probably the most challenging landings would probably have to be on the carrier, I guess, because you don't have the option to go anywhere else. We didn't have fuel to divert, and so you have to put it back on the deck. I thankfully didn't do it in any poor weather conditions. In fact, the hardest one I remember doing was in the Persian Gulf on a very flat, calm, glassy sea. I came in, and basically when you arrive over the carrier, it's a bit like arriving over an airfield. You come in over the top of the carrier and you fly a circuit to land, and you're coming over the water. And normally when there are waves, that gives you some context and some depth of field to get a sense of how high you are above the water. Obviously, you have a radar altimeter as well, but coming in over a flat, calm sea is very difficult. And I came alongside the ship, and for any of you that understand the way the Harrier lands on a ship, the aircraft decelerates alongside the vessel and stabilizes next to the landing spot, and the landing spot is marked by a person on the deck who just literally points at it. And as I came alongside the ship, I couldn't see anybody pointing at any landing spots, as hard as I looked, I could not see anyone. And so eventually, I've got a wingman behind me who's decelerating to come and land behind. So he needs me to get on with the landing. I couldn't see anybody, so I actually went around from that and did another circuit and burnt some more fuel, got even lower on fuel, but more pressure on, and I landed the second time. So that was probably the most challenging landing experience I've had. Let's have a look here. Murderface 151. Do you think the fast jet types in current RAF service are covering all bases in terms of mission capability and performance? I'm no expert on that. F-35. That's the most advanced combat aircraft in the world, and I have spoken to a few people that have flown it, and it sounds like it does what it says on the tin. And Typhoon's pretty capable as well, and of course we've got a lot of other aircraft in the support roles, both surveillance and air-to-air refueling. So from my perspective, it looks like they've got most things handled, but I have no deep insight into that, I'm afraid. Naveed asks me, hi Naveed, you're asking me, did I ever forget to lower the landing gear on landing? Nothing comes to mind, but at the back of my mind, I'm thinking that I may have flown a circuit as a student and forgot to put the gear down. So I'll say yes, but I can't remember when it was. I think it was probably a Hawk, but I don't know. Adam's asking, how do you think the Reds compare with other Premier display teams, Blue Angels, Thunderbirds, and in this age of defence cuts, do you think the Reds will still be around in 5 years? I'll answer the last question first. The Red Arrows have always been under pressure to be disbanded. When I was on the team joined the team in 93, we were under pressure, an extreme amount of pressure on the Ministry of Defence to cut costs, and the Red Arrows were in the spotlight. They're basically always in the spotlight. They're always looked at as a way of saving money, and I think there was a change while I was on the team in that the team not only then represented the RAF, but it started to represent industry more, and that's on the back of that. That's when we went on the world tours to South Africa and Asia and Australia, and I think the team's done a lot more since then. So I think it earns its money in that respect, as well as being a great ambassador for the UK and for the RAF. And the first part of the question, then you're asking how do you think the Reds compare with the other display teams? Yeah, they all do things slightly differently, and we all steal manoeuvres from each other. Remember, we stole a manoeuvre from the Snowbirds, Canadian Snowbirds, when I was on the team, which we thought was pretty good. I won't tell you which one it was. And they were they display with an airplane that's very underpowered, really, and do an amazing display, absolutely incredible. But what I will say about the Red Arrows is that makes them slightly more. I wouldn't say better, but more capable is that when the team designs the display for that year, they're basically designing 3 displays. They're designing the full display for displaying in beautiful weather, beautiful blue, clear skies. But of course, in Northern Europe, that's not always the case, and so the team also designs a rolling display, so that they can get the barrel rolls in, which will take the aircraft up to sort of 3,000 to 4,000 feet. And then there's a flat display with no barrel rolls and no loops. But what's I think unique about the team is that the display is designed in such a way that the team can switch from full to flat to rolling while the display is going on. So if the weather conditions change, so for example, we could run into a display site and there could be cloud, and we start flat, and then after 2 or 3 maneuvers, the cloud breaks and blows up, passes away, and we're into blue skies, and the boss can call going full, and the team goes into its full show. So it's quite a flexible routine, and I think that's kind of sets us apart, I think, from some of the other teams. Question here from Anton. What is your opinion of the best aerial demonstration team in the world, and why? Why is that? Well, I guess I just kind of answered that. I'm not saying the Reds are the best. I mean, there are different philosophies in some of these display teams. You look at the Blue Angels, look how close they fly. You know, the Red Arrows don't fly that close, but they do other things in a different way. So, yeah, right. I think I've answered that one. Let's see, what ones haven't I answered? Yeah, would I like to get myself in the seat of an F-35? I definitely would. In fact, I was talking to somebody who flies the F-35 recently, and he was talking about pilot retention in the RAF, and he was saying that the RAF is still looking for pilots to come in and work as reserve pilots. And I said, yeah, I'm a little bit too old though, because I'm 55. And he said, oh, no, they'll take people older than 55 now. I cannot imagine flying a fast jet at my age. It's physically it's punishing. You're pulling a lot of G, and you need to be physically very fit. And I couldn't do that now. I think I'd struggle to fly a Hawk, to be honest. But I would like to have sit in the back seat of an F-35. Another question here. Ian's asking, as a Harrier pilot, did you ever get to train with US Marine Corps AV-8B pilots? Not exactly train with them, but when we first got the Harrier 2, the GR5, we didn't have a flight simulator. And so we would go to the US Marine Corps base at Yuma in Arizona. We would use their simulator. How I worked with the Marines, the only time I've been in theatre with the Marines would be when we were on operations in the Balkans, but we didn't work with them directly. However, having said all that, we did have 2 exchange postings with the US Marine Corps. So we had an exchange at Yuma and an exchange at Cherry Point on the Harrier. And so we had United States Air Force and United States Marine Corps pilots in the RAF on the squadrons I served on, which was good, because you get a good cross-fertilization of ideas between how different forces do different things, and so that was very useful. So I've known a lot of US exchange pilots over the years. Right, what have we got here? Right, I need to scroll down here. I think that's better. I can see that question now. With the RAF at 30,000 personnel and so few fast jets, how can the 9-ship Red Arrows be justified? Yeah, that's not my call, really. I kind of touched on that, answering that question earlier on. I think you can justify them by the fact that they do a lot for UK industry. And but yeah, I don't hold the purse strings, so I can't say whether that's value for money or not. Remember, those pilots are, if they don't fly in the Red Arrows, they're going to be flying something else, and they're already qualified on the Hawk and other fast jets. The aircraft are they're old. It's the old Hawk from the 1980s. So in terms of cost, they probably don't cost that much to run. But yeah, I can't really answer that one fully for you, I'm afraid. Right, what other questions have we got here? Sorry, just scrolling down here. Another question from Yin about the Red Arrows. What's the most challenging maneuver? Yeah, the synchro pair. What they do is pretty challenging. I was not in the synchro pair, so from the main section perspective, yeah, what's the definition of challenging? We used to do the vertical split, which kind of looks a bit like a palm tree, where you pull up in the vertical and then split. The front section splits. It doesn't look like a difficult maneuver, but it's very difficult to get it right. very difficult to get the spacing right so it looks good. So that, bizarrely, was quite a challenging maneuver. The other one that springs to mind are the rollbacks. So you're pitching and rolling again to get that to look right is quite difficult. And the other thing about the rollbacks is there are so many different changes in smoke. I think you start off with a white smoke, and then you get a red, and then you change to blue for the roll, and then you change back to red, and then you do that twice, and then you change back to white. And if anybody knows anything about the switchology in the Hawk, on the Red Arrows Hawk, but on the stick there are three buttons, one for each color. And then on the combing there are three lights, the red, blue, and white. So obviously you press a button to turn the smoke on. So let's say the white smoke, the white light comes on. That's great. The problem is if you then turn another color on, that comes on as well. So now you have white and the color. So when you're changing the smoke colors during the display, for example, the rollbacks, you come in and you turn the white smoke on, and then you turn the blue smoke on and the white smoke off, and you do the maneuver. And then you turn the red smoke on and the blue smoke off, and then you do it all again. So it's very easy to make a mistake and to get the colors out of sequence. And I know the team still does this, and we did it back in the 90s. We have a fining system. So if you make a mistake, you get fined. Back in the day, it was £1. And that's £1 per mistake. So if you make several color change mistakes in rollbacks, it can get quite expensive. Mistakes would be putting the smokes on too early or too late or not at all. So that could be quite a good incentive to get it right. So yeah, that was quite challenging. Right, let me see if I can scroll down and find some other questions. Another question here about the Jaguar.
Hello.
Occasionally had some heat seekers for self-defense. Did you ever get to do BFM or get a lock on interceptors during attack sorties or training? So, like the Harrier, we did do air-to-air training in the Jaguar, but again, it's not designed for air-to-air. It's really a ground attack aircraft, and the only times I ever flew with sidewinders was not on the over. We didn't have them on the over wing pylons like they later got. So I flew some training rounds. So we did a lot of training with those, and I trained with them on the Harrier as well. And I got to fire a couple of sidewinders in peacetime training on the range as well. So I did that. Yeah. In fact, just digressing slightly, when we were in the Baltics, we were flying with live sidewinders for the first part of the operation. But we had so much air cover from the likes of F-15s and F-16s and F-18s. They were always the ones that were going to be in any air-to-air fight. So I made the decision to take the sidewinders off the airplane because they were a bit of a pain. The problem with forward-firing weapons is when you start the aircraft up, the forward-firing weapons need to be safe, and you can only make them live pointing in a safe direction. And that meant taxiing to a certain location, pointing a certain heading. The armorers then live the weapons. You go flying. When you come back, if they're still on the airplane, then you have to go through the whole process again, and it's quite time-consuming. And we were never going to use them, so we took them off in the end. Question here: what's the scariest situation you've ever found yourself in? I nearly hit the ground in training in Canada at Goose Bay, doing some low flying there. That's really scared me. Goose Bay is on the Labrador coast, the east coast of Canada, and we would go there every few years to do OLF, operational low flying, down to 100 feet. There's no towns or villages or even roads out there, so you can fly around low level to your heart's content. It's not going to upset anybody, and it's kind of rolling, flattish terrain with a lot of trees. and I was looking over my shoulder for the aircraft that was the aggressor, that was working as the aggressor, and just looked over a little bit too long. And when I looked up, I was pointing at trees, and I pulled, and I was convinced I had clipped the top of the trees. So when I landed, so I got out and walked around the airplane to look for the branches that were almost certainly embedded in the fuselage somewhere, but I didn't. But I played the film back, the video back, and it was pretty low. So that's probably the scariest situation I've found myself in. Well, people might be interested to know what we're doing at the moment. So I get off the military side of things. So like I said, I'm flying the Boeing 747 freighter, and we are working flat out at the moment. As you can imagine, being part of the supply chain, so we're carrying a lot of equipment and a lot of pharmaceuticals and a lot of PPE and engineering equipment around. So I've done some flights recently up into China to collect some all kinds of equipment, actually, and then I was lucky enough to go to the US last week. So I've just come back from Anchorage, and I was down in Mexico City and Guadalajara. So that was interesting, and frankly, anything that gets me out of a hotel at the moment is great. And what was lovely was on the flight back from Mexico was during the day, and we went right over the top of the Grand Canyon. So that was what a spectacular view of the Grand Canyon, and then Zion National Park, and then the whole of the Cascades and Mount St. Helens. So that was amazing. So then I got back to Anchorage, and then Anchorage to Hong Kong, which is where I am at the moment, and trying to figure out what time zone I'm on at the moment. I'm not actually sure. I'm trying to get back onto European time. I've definitely been on US time, and it's currently 25 to 3 in the morning, so I'm wide awake. So that's just part of what being an airline pilot is like. So yeah, that's what I've been up to at the moment. Off to Malaysia in a day or two, and then hopefully back through India to Europe next week, and I'm going to take some days off. Okay, Flight Express is asking, do you have any interactions with the Royal Canadian Air Force? If so, do you have any story about that? What do you think the future of the Air Force aviation will be? Lastly, what was the most exciting experience you had? RCAF, I did Maple Flag at Cold Lake. That was on the Jaguar. So we tanked the airplanes from Coltishall across the Atlantic, and then across Canada to Cold Lake, and we spent 2 weeks there on Maple Flag, which was a fantastic exercise. Really enjoyed that. Obviously working a lot with the Canadian Air Force there. Don't know if I did. I think I did a few exercises in Europe with Canadian F-18s, so that's been good. And future of the Air Force, don't know, can't really comment on that. Drones are going to becoming more and more important, I guess, and pilotless aircraft, but I don't really know much more about that. Most exciting experience I had was, I guess it's got to be, well, exciting would be flying the Harrier at night off the carrier and on operations in the Balkans. That's probably the most exciting. The most fun would be the Red Arrows, definitely. Favorite aircraft is the Harrier GR7 for me. How did the Hawk compare with the Hawk? So how did the Red Arrows Hawk compare with Hawk models you encountered in OCE or Foster? Well, it was the same airplane. So when I went through training, it was the Hawk T Mark 1, and that's what we flew in the Red Arrows. So I've not flown any of the later models, so I can't comment on those. Question here, sorry, Harrier, should a non-vertical flight takeoff version been built, which would give more payload range and performance? Maybe, I don't know. That would be for engineers to work out. I don't think the airframe would have allowed us to carry much more anyway. But obviously, that's something they've done with the F-35, which is a development of the Harrier. Do I remember at Larbrook, do I remember the Alpagos ice cream parlor in Vatsa? No, sorry. Bird strike in 1998, this is a follow-up question, I think. Did you ever experience a serious failure or emergency whilst flying the Harrier? Yeah, one of the most interesting ones I had. Yeah, this was really interesting. So it was when I was flying the GR3. We were on field operations in Senalaga, both 3 Squadron and 4 Squadron. I was on 3 Squadron, and I was asked to go by road back to Gütersloh and pick up a GR3 that had been worked on by the engineers, but it belonged to 4 Squadron. So I was going to take off out of Gütersloh, do a short sortie, and land back into the 4 Squadron field site, which actually, as it happens, was the same field site that was in the T4 film that went out on YouTube a few weeks ago. So I went to Gütersloh, and I got this GR3, and I planned a sortie. We were taking part in an exercise at the time, so everything was quite realistic. And I took off from Gütersloh. I flew about 20-minute sortie, came into that field site, and decelerated towards the pad, pretty much like you saw it on that. If you've seen the T4 video, it's like that. So from 1,000 feet, descending towards the pad to be over the pad at about 150 feet, and just slowing from 420 knots down to 0. And you're doing this, visually on a map. And I'm coming down, and I go below 200 knots, and I push the gear button to put the gear down, and nothing happens. No gear, there's no rumble, there's no vibrations, no sound, and then the gear is indicating that it's up. So I kind of have a think about that one, and the hydraulic systems are all okay. I can't figure out what the problem is, and the only option I've got now is to go back to Gütersloh, which is about 10 minutes up the road. So I did a go around. I called on the radio that I was going back to Gütersloh, and I pulled out the flight reference cards to figure out what to do. And I came into the circuit. By now I'm quite low on fuel, and I turned downwind, and I used the alternate gear extension system, which is a nitrogen bottle. So normally the system is powered by hydraulics. If that doesn't work, there is a nitrogen bottle that basically blows the gear down. And I went through the drill, pulled the button to fire the alternate system, and guess what? Nothing happened. And now the fuel lights are flashing, and the tower are saying, yeah, we can't see the gear. So I did one more circuit while I tried to figure out what I could do. But basically, there was nothing I could do at that point because I'd used the alternate system. So I then came around and I decelerated towards one of the concrete vertical landing pads, which happened to be outside of 4 Squadron's hangar. And I did a vertical landing without the gear, and put the jet down on this pad, which did a little bit of damage to the underside of the aircraft. And it turned out that there were 2 failures that had happened. One was a fuse in the normal gear extension system that had blown. And in fact, that was the problem that had happened previously, and the engineers have been working on that. And it happened again. But unfortunately for me, there was also a fault in the nitrogen bottle in the alternate system, and the squib that fires a nitrogen bottle didn't work. It was a failure. In fact, when they did a check on the fleet and found a whole load of them that didn't work, so I was a bit unlucky. So that was an interesting experience in the Harrier for me. What specific visual references did you use in maintaining formation in the Red Arrows maneuvers? Yeah, so in order to fly close formation on any other airplane, you use visual references. Effectively, you triangulate your position in space based on some lining up some visual cues. And there essentially, in the Red Arrows, there are 2 visual references on the wing that put you in slightly different positions according to which position you're flying. But one of them is you put the wingtip on the Central Flight School badge, which is on the side of the airplane, and then looking underneath the wing of the aircraft that's next to you, you basically line up a couple of panel lines on the flap jacks at the back. They're really small, but they put you exactly in the right position. So in the first 3 months of training, in my first year when you first join the team, that's all you do is you just look at those references, and you just practice flying a very steady position. because when you start in the team, you start off with only 3 or 4 aircraft. Start small and build it up, and you need to, by the end of the 3 months, you need to be flying a very solid position that's not moving around, because if you start moving around, the aircraft on the outside of you, they'll start moving around as well, so it makes it much harder for them. So those were the visual references. So there's a number of other ones you'd use for things like Concorde formation, where you're quite a long way from the leader, and I can't exactly remember what they were. But it's worth, just to finish that question off, it's worth saying that when you're flying close formation in the team, everything's referenced from the team leader. So even though I might be 3 aircraft out from where the leader is, I've got other airplanes between myself and him, I'm still looking at the team leader's aircraft. I'm trying to fly references on him with occasional cross-check of where the other aircraft are. So it's all basically done off the leader. That's the same for all the positions in the team. Flight Express is asking, have you ever flown a helicopter? Have you ever wanted to and thought about flying helicopters? I have flown a helicopter, or a number of helicopters. As part of the pre-OCU, Harrier OCU training, we went to Shawbury and we flew the Gazelle helicopter on 3 kind of 1 or 2 hour flights out of Shawbury with a helicopter instructor. And the great thing about that course, if you can call it a course, was that I didn't have to learn any of the technical information on the airplane. I didn't have to know anything about any of the emergency procedures. I didn't have to know any of the checks. But all of that was done by the QHI. My job was just to go off and fly the airplane. So it was a great course, and we did some amazing flying. And we went and landed in some clearings that, from the air, didn't look like clearings to me, but we managed to get into these things. So that was really interesting. I loved that. I'm not sure it actually had any relevance to flying a Harrier, but it didn't matter. That was great. And since then, I got to fly again, not solo. I've never soloed in a helicopter, but I got to fly a Puma in Belize, and I've flown a Jet Ranger, civilian Jet Ranger as well. So yeah, great. I'd love to fly helicopters. It's too expensive, but yeah, if those lotto numbers come in, I might get one. Simon Narbit, hi Simon. You're asking me, were you ever posted to Brawley? I'm guessing you're a local lad, and you really missed the RAF there. I did my tactical weapons unit training at Chivner, down in Devon, near Ilfracombe, and then when I graduated from that course, they posted me to the Jaguar, but there were delays in the training system, and Lossiemouth were not ready to accept me onto the OCU, so there was a period of holding. And at that time, there were no students going through the TW at Brawley, which is the other tactical weapons unit. So they sent us there, and I was there for about a month, I think, just flying the Hawk around Wales, which is a lovely place to be, and Brawley is a great area to be, and it's a shame that the base is closed. I loved it up there. In fact, I drove very close to Brawley a few weeks ago, so
right.
That kind of reminded me of what it was like there. So yeah, I really missed the place. It was great, and I love flying out of Valley as well. I'm not going to answer the one about the Thunderbirds, the Blue Angels, and Sidewinders. Question from Jason. Hi, Jason. Thanks for the comments on the interview that I did. A lot rests on that Pegasus engine, and it's highly revered, but exhaust ingestion aside, does it have any vices? I can't think of it. It was great. It's a great engine. And very robust. And I can't think of any bad things about the Pegasus, and it was very robust, and you could take birds down the intake and it might cough a bit, but it basically just spit them out and carry on running. Very reliable engine in most cases. Actually, though, it's reminded me of a story which I will recount. So I was back flying. So I was flying the GI. I ended up at Wittering. I was doing some flying there on the OCU, and I was in the front seat of the T4 doing basically a conversion back onto the airplane. I was in the front seat of the T4. We were doing some VSTOL flying at Wittering, and we were on the Bravo North pad, which is a large concrete VSTOL pad just off the main runway. And we'd done what we planned to do was a thing called a press up. So basically a vertical takeoff into the hover, sit there for 100 feet for a couple of seconds, and then get back on the markers and come back down and do a vertical landing. And I'm doing this as a student in the front, instructors in the back. We're pointing south into wind. I slammed to full power. We pop up into the hover. We're sitting in the hover. And as we're doing this, 2 GR5s from one squadron taxi onto the main runway. And I can hear them on the frequency because they're obviously getting clearance to take off. And I'm now sitting in the hover just looking out at the markers, and these 2 GR5s accelerate down the runway. And almost immediately, the wingman, all I see is a huge stream of sparks out the back of the aircraft. And I'm looking down on top of it, so I can't see where these sparks are coming from. It looks to me like something's just dragging along the runway, as if the tyres have gone or the speed brake is dragging, but it's huge. It's a bit like you see people sharpening a knife on a wheel, and you see those streams of sparks. So they were coming out back, and something that clearly was wrong, and nothing was being said. The tower didn't say anything. So I just hit the RT button and I said, number 2, you've got sparks coming out the back of your aircraft. That's about all I could think to say. And at that point, the 2 aircraft got airborne. And the guy that was flying the airplane was Chris Huckstep, who happened to be the guy that was flying the T4 on the T4 video that I put on YouTube recently. Chris was flying it, and he said he heard the radio call and he thought, that's me. And just as he got airborne, the engine blew up. It quit. Basically, one of the compressor blades failed. It had some foreign object damage that hadn't been picked up. The blade failed. The engine basically completely disintegrated. But it gave him a couple of seconds to go, yeah, that's me, and he ejected. So I watched this happen. I can still visualize it in my head as he ejected. And we didn't have much fuel because we were at the end of our sortie. But the guy in the back seat said, well, I have control. And he accelerated away out of the hover because he wanted to fly over the top of the site as we saw this GR5 slew to basically came to rest on the grass off the side of the runway on fire. And Chris is up in the chute and coming back down. The seat's landing on the runway. We get to see the whole thing. And we come back around and we land. So there's a Pegasus failure story, but I don't have one myself. I always found it to be very reliable. Here's a question from Sam. What squadron were you at when I was on the Jag, and what was the squadron's primary role? So I was on 54F Squadron, 54 Fighter Squadron, quite a famous squadron. It was one of the Battle of Britain squadrons. We were based at RAF Coltishall in Norfolk, and we had a NATO commitment to defend the Baltic region in case of a wartime scenario. You've got to remember this is back in the early 80s, so the Cold War was still on. And so twice a year we would deploy to Denmark, and we would operate from Tirstrup on the east coast. And we had 2 roles really. One was TASMO, Tactical Air Support of Maritime Operations, so attacking ships was one of our roles, and the other role was battlefield interdiction against targets in what would have been East Germany, military targets. That was our role, primary role. Question from Murderface151: Do you miss the 90s? I'm an RAF child and only have golden memories of those years and the aircraft types of the day. Do you remember them with such fondness? I do, but I think anybody that's been in the military will always look back and remember those days as being some of their fondest memories. You know, my dad was in the Air Force in the 50s, and he looks back on those days flying Meteors and Vampires, and they had all kinds of airplanes in the Air Force then, and it was a huge operation. So yeah, I kind of do. I do miss those days. And I miss my time in the RAF, definitely. Another one here. Were we in the same squadron as Bang Out Bill? Bang Out Bill. I'm not sure I know who that is. But he ejected 3 times. Lucky guy, or unlucky, whichever way you look at it. I don't think I know him. Another question from Yin. In the US Navy Blue Angels, there's a healthy rivalry between the Diamond pilots and solos. Is there a similar rivalry in the Red Arrows between Jippo and Synchro pair? Yeah, well, between Jippo and Enid. So Enid's the front 5, famous 5. So that's 1 to 5 at the front is Enid, and then you've got Jippo, which are the other 4, which the Synchro pair. Yeah, so there's a huge amount of, there's a lot of banter, but there's a lot of banter in the Air Force anyway. And the thing is, in the team, they video every single display that they do, whether it's a practice or an actual display. And then when the display's finished and we've landed, we then debrief the show, and we do it using the video. So there's no way to lie in the debrief. And so there's a huge amount of banter between if Enid do something wrong, then Jippo are going to be all over it. And but even more so, they get even more upset if Synchro do something wrong, like they get the pass in entirely the wrong place or something. Then we're not slow in giving them some banter back. So yeah, there's a lot of rivalry. Paul's asking me, where do you think the Reds will move to when Scampton's closed? I've heard a number of places mentioned, and I don't know. I haven't heard the latest, to be honest. The last stuff I heard was a couple of years ago, and I think Wittering was talked about, and we thought that would be a great place to put the team. So I don't know. In fact, on my time, it was annoying for us because on my time, we started at Scampton. My first year was at Scampton, and then they decided to close Scampton, and they moved us to Cranwell, but we were still practicing at Scampton. So it was far from ideal, and a lot of the infrastructure at Scampton was still in existence. There were people that still lived there. There were some units that were still based there. They had to maintain the runway because the team was displaying there, so we still had air traffic control. So it was a crazy time, and thankfully the team went back to Scampton and they're there now. So that's good. Craig, did you enjoy wearing? Oh, no, that's the one with the flaps. I already answered that one. Ian's asking, do you ever encounter air sickness during any part of your flight training? I've never encountered air sickness in my training, thankfully. But like anybody flying in a vehicle that you're not in control of, so whether it's a car or an aeroplane, as a passenger you can sometimes feel ill, and I have been in the back of some airplanes, Harriers and Hawks, where I was probably spending a little bit too much time looking down at the map and not enough time looking out, and I did feel quite unwell. But I don't think I've ever been sick in an airplane. I think I could safely say that one. What else we got here? What's my opinions of the Silver Falcons display team when you visited 95? Great bunch of guys, and a great team. They really looked after us. We went to Hootspree, which was their base in Kruger National Park, and so we'd done displays in Pretoria and Cape Town and Durban, and then we were invited to Hootspree, and we stayed with them there. And a great bunch of guys. Really enjoyed seeing their displays as well, and some good memories actually. And one of the best photos I've got, which I still have on my company iPad, is a photo taken from above with the Silver Falcons out the front and the Reds in our Diamond 9 behind them, right over the top of Kruger National Park. So that's a particularly nice photo. Next one. After Red Arrows training and displaying, how demanding did further formation flying feel when you reverted back to your next squadron? Did it have the same demands workload as it felt previously? Well, all fast jet pilots learn to fly formation in basic training. It's just part of what you need to, one of the skills you need to learn, because often you're having to go through bad weather where you you have to close up into close formation. But normally the kind of manoeuvring you're doing is only gentle turns, and at the most there's probably only three of you, so there's the leader and an aircraft on each wing. So although that is demanding, it's a whole new level when you go to the team. And I remember visiting the Red Arrows before I was chosen to join the team, and I flew with them on one day in the back seat, firstly with the team leader, and I flew with a few of the other pilots. So I was down the back of the formation, and that was my first experience of seeing this formation flying, and I was just, this is crazy. I mean, this is nuts. I've never seen anything like this, and these guys are looping and rolling. It's a whole different level of formation flying. So going back to flying the Harrier, yeah, the formation flying was not anywhere near as demanding, but the job of flying a combat aircraft, whatever it is far more demanding than flying in the Red Arrows. You know, putting the formation side of it aside, you know, I don't want to take it away from the team. These formation teams do a great job, but they practice, and they get very good at doing that. You know, combat flying in an operation environment where the plan's changing all the time and you've got people trying to shoot at you is a whole different ball game and far more demanding than doing an air show. Yin's asking, as an RAF Jaguar pilot, did you ever interact with the French Army de l'Air Jaguar pilots, and was there any rivalry? Again, I think I probably did some exercises with the French, almost certainly did. And they kind of all blended into one. So I don't remember any specifics about flying with the French. But I do remember when I was at RAF Lossiemouth, when I was on the OCU at Lossiemouth, training to be a Jaguar pilot, some French Jaguars flew over to Lossiemouth for the weekend. And if you know the Jaguar, it's got two Aden cannons, and it's got a compartment that runs across the aircraft airframe above the guns where the ammunition trays go. They're quite large, and on a peacetime flight where you're not using the guns, those are empty, so you can actually use them for putting luggage in there. In fact, we had bags that were specifically made to go in these slots. So these French Jaguars came over and they filled the ammunition trays with whiskey. Because Lossiemouth is right there in the heart of the Spey Valley, where all of the distilleries are. They filled up these things, but I don't know how many bottles of whiskey they got in there, but it was a lot. So that's my memory of French Jaguars and Jaguar pilots. Mike's asking, did you have many problems with debris ingestion at the temporary airfields you operated in Germany? So we did a lot. You know, the Harrier, the versatility of the Harrier was that you could operate it from these field sites. You could take off and land on grass and you know, all kinds of areas that you would never operate a fast jet in normally. But we had to take care that not to ingest any debris, and so when we were taxiing out, we would have to do it in a certain order so that the jets in front didn't point the jet pipes back at the ones behind and blow dirt and stones up. So that's quite important. The other thing about the Harrier is if you're going to do a vertical landing, the pad has to be swept. So you can't just go and land on a road anywhere or even a runway. It has to be swept of any foreign object damage, any stones or dirt or anything. If you're landing on a surface that's not been swept, then you have to do a thing called a rolling vertical landing. And essentially, it's a jet-borne landing, but you have 50 knots of forward speed on, so that as the airplane comes down to touch down on the runway, the jet efflux is blowing up dust and dirt, but you've got enough forward speed that it never quite reaches the lip of the intake and can't get re-ingested into the engine. So that's what they call an RVL, a rolling vertical landing. We used to do a lot of those. Adam Cotton's asking me, schoolboy question, but what's the fastest you've been in an RAF fast jet in terms of true airspeed and the highest altitude you flew? Or would you have liked to have flown Lightnings or Phantoms? Fastest I've been, I just went supersonic in a Harrier GR3. I've been supersonic in a Jaguar, a clean Jaguar, at 10,000 feet out to sea, going out to sea somewhere. Highest altitude, probably in the Hawk, mid 40s. In a Hawk. In fact, when we went, just as a funny joke thing we did, when we were doing the Africa tour, we were going into Pretoria, and as we crossed the border of Zimbabwe into South Africa, the South African Air Force sent up some Cheetah intercept aircraft to meet us and to bring us to Pretoria. The Cheetah is basically it's a Mirage built under license. So our boss, the Red One, decided let's go high. So we were up at, I don't know, 42 or something, and unfortunately the Cheetahs they had some outboard stores and they were a bit heavy and they couldn't get up there. So they had to ask us to come down, which was quite amusing. Would I have liked to have flown Lightnings or Phantoms? As a kid, the Phantom was my favourite aeroplane. I drew pictures of it. I made airfix kits of it. I thought it was amazing. I see photos of it now in museums. I think, what a great-looking aircraft. So I would have liked to have flown the Phantom, but I would have only liked to have done it in Germany in the ground attack role. I would have loved to have done that. Lightning, I would have liked to have flown the Lightning. It was just in service when I was doing my first tour. So I did some combat, some sorties against Lightnings. And I think I had a chance to go for a flight, but when you're young, you think of, I don't need to worry about that, and I didn't do it. I didn't go for a flight in a Lightning. I could have done. And I've regretted it ever since. Next question, was there a functioning HUD with attack symbology on the Jaguars? Yeah, we had a good head-up display, a very good attack symbology for ground attack. So yeah, it was very good. Way better than the GR3. So when I went to the GR3, it was a bit of a step back in terms of avionics technology. It took a while for that to catch up. Another question. During your display maneuvers, did you have to visually acquire the switches to trigger smoke, or did you feel threat blind? And if so, did this affect concentration? How did you... Yeah, well, I've kind of answered that. There are buttons on the stick, and no, you don't have to look at it, but you've got lights up on the coaming. And the worst thing you can see is to see two lights on at the same time. And that does sap your capability to actually, it does affect your concentration, and it costs a lot of money as well. Zigzag Ground Zero is asking, in combat, any benefits using the thrust vectoring? I kind of answered that one already. As a pilot, you see all sorts of beautiful cloud formation sites and weather phenomena. Any particular memories come to mind? Yeah, flying over the Grand Canyon a couple of days ago. That was fantastic. I took some superb photos. And we see, especially around the tropics, we see some incredible thunderstorm formations. They've got proper thunderstorms in this part of the world that go up to 60-odd thousand feet. So, yeah, we see a lot of those, and we have to dodge around them. We have weather radar now to go around those. So, yeah, I've got some pretty nice photos I've taken over the years. Adam's saying a friend of his works for BA on the 787, but describes the actual flying as quite dull. More cockpit management. Would you agree? I would. Dull. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of cockpit management, and the type of flying I'm doing now is obviously completely different from flying a Harrier, but it has its own challenges. So I always describe it as 95% of, what do I say, dull? Let's say quiet, and 5% of potentially sheer terror. The other day I was putting the Dash 8 down on the short runway in Mumbai at max landing weight of 345 tons. That's heavy, that's a big airplane, and it goes across the fence pretty quick. So that wasn't dull. And it has its moments, and but yeah, there's a lot of cockpit management involved, and working as a crew as well. So I'm working with another pilot, and we're a team. So that dynamic's very important, and completely different from single seat flying. And that's got to be right. Otherwise, it makes both of our jobs difficult if we're not working together in the right way. I got what was it like flying low level in the fast jet?
Yeah, that's one.
What's the speed at low level? We used to fly around at sort of 480 knots, so pushing out to 500 would be a kind of a fastest kind of speed at low level. Flying at a low level is the one one type of flying that I did in the military that I really miss, because you can't do it anywhere else really. So I mentioned flying around Scotland. It's just amazing to fly fast jet at 250 feet or even down to 100 feet, as we're allowed to do on some occasions. Absolutely amazing. You see those videos and posts that people put on Twitter of jets flying down the Mac Loop in Wales. I used to love flying down that valley. So I really missed that, and that was great. What's your lowest altitude record in AGL flying in the fast jet? Well, apart from landing, the lowest would be when I nearly hit the trees in Canada, which I was not proud of, and that was we were down to double figures on the Radalt. What's the hardest thing you had to master in your career? Yeah, that would be a split between flying the Harrier and learning to fly in the Red Arrows, the display in the Red Arrows. That probably I don't know which is I think you need the precision in the Red Arrows, so you've got to get that absolutely right, and you're displaying in front of a huge audience, so you've really got to get that right. So that's probably the hardest thing I had to master. And I've got a question here from Templar7832. Hi there. I'm learning to do formation in a team in DCS, a flight sim, and I'm having a nightmare maintaining high degree turns and maintaining a good line with the boss. I guess we're talking about a simulator. I'm not quite sure what kind of simulator that would be and how close it is to the real airplane. You've got to maintain even though you're in a bank, you've got to be in the same bank as the leader. So if you've got a few degrees difference, that's going to change the whole dynamic. And so your wings have got to be parallel with the leader's wings. And if they're not, it may be that there's a bit of yaw involved there as well. Possibly the problem. So yeah, get on the references, nail the references and hold those, and then make sure the wings are parallel. If you feel like you're still being pulled here and there, and maybe there's a bit of yaw required. Is there an aircraft that you would have liked to fly if you had the opportunity? For my time in the Air Force, I think I'd like to have gone for a trip in the Buccaneer and the Lightning, as I said. They would have been airplanes I'd like to have flown in. I'm not sure I wanted to be posted to them, but I would have liked to have had a go in them. And of course now the F-35 or Typhoon would be amazing to go for a trip in. Ever flown a Jag on one engine? No, I don't think I have. I think I might have had a bird strike and have one throttled back, but I never shut one down. But hey, the performance was not good on the Jaguar. Was not good at all. It needed more thrust, so that would not have been a fun exercise, and you'd have almost certainly been jettisoning the stores, I think. That was usually what would happen if you had to shut an engine down. If I could buy an aircraft for private use, which one would you buy? Oh, I'd buy a Gulfstream. I'd buy a Gulfstream, I'd sit in the back drinking champagne, and I'd get a friend of mine to fly it. If I was one that I was going to fly, probably something like an Extra. But yeah, probably an Extra or a Pitts. Something like that. And that's what's life like after military service. So what is life like after military service? What do pilots do after they leave? And I'm assuming that they all don't fly for the airlines. That is actually true. I made a conscious decision to continue flying, and I felt that I was looking for a lifestyle change as well as a different challenge. So going to the airlines was the natural progression for me. and a lot of people do that. And in fact, I work with a lot of ex-military pilots from all around the world, and some of them are ex-RAF pilots who I knew and worked with in the RAF. So I get to fly with them. One of them is John Rands, who was the team leader when I was on the team. We occasionally fly together because he's on the same fleet as me, so that's great. Ones that don't do that, I know of one that is now a multi-millionaire. I'm not jealous about that, and that's something to do with software. And another friend of mine who I do work with runs a company called Mission Excellence. You can look them up on the internet, Mission Excellence. And I've done quite a bit of work with them, doing seminars for various companies in the UK and around the world, with other ex-military pilots, some pilots, not all pilots, but ex-military people. So that's been some of the stuff I've been doing. I'm going to wish somebody a happy birthday here from Nairwar Bro 15. Your friend Chicken Fried Cola, a happy birthday. I wonder how old you are, but yeah, happy birthday. I hope where you are it's not too stressful and you've got some loved ones around you to celebrate it. I hope you have a good day. Hi Dave, yeah, good to speak to you. And he sent a little message there, and we're hoping to go on a motorcycle trip later in the year. Bill Langworthy is the guy that ejected multiple times, and I know the name, but I don't know him personally. If there was one thing that the Harrier could have been upgraded with, what would be your choice? I think it would have been useful to have the radar. I think the Harrier 2 Plus, which the Marine Corps fly, yeah, would have been a useful thing to have, both for air-to-air and air-to-ground. That would have been what would have been good to have on the airplane. What kept me motivated? That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I've had a couple of incidents in my career, in my adult career, flying career, that really got me down. And I guess at the end of the day, I just thought, I'm just not going to let them get me down. I'm just going to persevere, and I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think having the right people around you helps as well, whether that's family or in flying, it's probably more important that you have the right friends around you in your job, whether it's in the military or whether it's in civil flying, because it is a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult career, and men are not very good at opening up and sharing. But so, yeah, I think that's why in the Air Force it was good that we had good camaraderie. And happy hour on a Friday night would always be quite raucous, but it was a great time to let off steam and also chat to people about what was going on, and you would hear about what was going on in their lives. And so I think that's probably one of the things that kept me motivated. What are my thoughts on the F-14 Tomcat, and does a dark part of your inside wish you'd flown them? I don't think the Tomcat was ever on my list of airplanes to fly. Definitely a great airplane, of course. And I did a great job in the US Navy, and I did some work with it in the Balkans. So a very effective aircraft, but I never particularly wanted to fly one. Good question here. So how were pilots selected to fly the Harrier or the Jaguar? So after doing the advanced training in the Hawk, you go and you then learn to use the Hawk as a weapon system and tactical weapons unit, dropping practice bombs, firing the gun, and firing rockets. And at the end of that course, the staff will choose which aircraft you go to. You have a wish list, so you can write down which airplane you'd like to go and fly. But the staff obviously look at how your performance was on the course. And top of the tree when I was going through would have been the Harrier and the Lightning, and then probably the Jaguar. And I was selected to fly the Jaguar, which was great. I wasn't really good enough at that point, I don't think, to fly the Harrier. I wasn't mature enough to fly the aeroplane. So I did a tour on the Jaguar, and then at the end of that tour, I put down my choices of airplanes I'd like to fly, or postings that I'd like to do. One was to stay on the Jaguar and become a weapons instructor. I think I put the Harrier down as one, and I put F-16 exchange with the United States Air Force because that's an option you can put down as well. And I didn't get picked for any of those. I got picked to be a qualified flying instructor, and was all set to go to Scampton to Central Flying School to do the course. And then an unfortunate incident happened on the Harrier force, and there was an accident. 2 pilots were killed. They were looking for some other pilots to replace them, and I was asked if I'd like to go to the Harrier, and that was a bit of a no-brainer, really. So that's how I got selected to go to the Harrier. So I hope that answers the question for you. And I guess we're kind of pretty much at the end now, Mike.